Hello, class. Professor Mandeville back. What we're going to cover in detail now is what I like to call the century of conflict, which some of it's contained in chapter 4 in your book. And, the material between, since we're in sort of a fast pace, you can read for yourself and study the material in chapters 3 and 4. And I'm going to focus in on this area, which your author doesn't give enough attention to as far as I'm concerned. He gives you a lot of attention and explanations as to how the colonies developed socially, and also devotes a lot of time to the evolution of the institution of slavery in America, a very pertinent subject, but he does a fine job writing about it. So, read that carefully. And obviously, you're taking the inquisitive tests for chapters 2, 3, and 4. And you can talk about it in the discussion. I'll pose some more questions, too. Which reminds me, you guys got to get into that discussion. You got to start making up your own questions, like about slavery, or about Pennsylvania, or about religion, or about whatever. I'm not going to make up all the questions. You need to do that too. That's part of the discussion, and you all need to get in there and get working on it. So, what I want to cover in this lecture is I posted this handout that I typically give in class in the mini lecture on a century of conflict. If you click on that link, it'll be a PDF that you can print out if you want, or you can just have it on your computer screen. That's up to you. So let me talk about this particular handout, and that's the way I'll cover it. Now, what this is covering here, as you can see, from 1689 until 1763, Britain and France were at war more than they were at peace. And by this point, by 1689, England and France had emerged as the two top players. Spain was already entering a state of decline. And we talked about part of that a long time ago. It's because they didn't industrialize. And slowly but surely, they're going to start losing grips on their massive holdings in North America, the Caribbean, and South America. And France and England will emerge as the two power players. So, on that chart that you can see, that you've either printed or you're looking at it on your computer screen, there's different columns. One's the dates that these conflicts took place. Second one is the European name of the war, like the first one, the War of the League of Augsburg. All those European names you can forget about. We're not going to deal with them under the European names. This is American history. We're going to study them by the American name, which is the third column. And you can see the very first war we're going to cover is King William's War. The next column shows you major allies that are in these conflicts. We can boil that down and simplify that entire, what looks like pretty complicated column. It's France versus England. The European allies come and go. They're not really big players, especially in the North American theater of action. All these conflicts are going to have conflicts that happen here in North America, conflicts that happen over in Europe. We only care about the North American conflicts. So it's going to be a series of wars between France and England. And the major players that we care about as allies in the North American theater of action, there's going to be various Native American allies. And for much of this, the French will have the monopoly on having the most Native American allies, because of their much better relationship originally forged by Samuel de Champlain. Now, the issues we can sum up pretty quickly, too. You don't need to pay much attention to that. This is a struggle for empire. Both France and England at this point think they can be the biggest, strongest empire in the world and control the world. And that's the game plan. And this is their quest. Part of it is controlling North America. Now, the major American battles we'll talk about. And I don't expect you to know any treaties. I'll never ask you a question. What treaty solved this war, whatever. So, the very first one, King William's War. Conflict between France and England and their Native American allies. And the major American battle that took place, as you can see on your handout, troops raised by Sir William Phipps. Excuse me, I gotta drink water. My allergies are wreaking havoc with me this week with all the cottonwood. Sorry. Troops raised by Sir William Phipps up in New England assaulted Quebec in 1690. So let me clear up what that's all about. The centerpiece of New France, which is the French colony in North America, which is pretty huge at this point, stretching up and down the St. Lawrence River into present-day Michigan, the upper Midwest. At one point, they controlled the Mississippi River. They controlled half the Champlain Valley. The demarcation line between the French and Brits in our backyard was Split Rock on Lake Champlain. Everything north of Split Rock was French. Everything south was British at one point. But the centerpiece of the New France was what they called Quebec. Now, this can be confusing. It's not the province of Quebec. It's what we call today Quebec City. It was a fortified city. It's where all the government operations were, and it was the centerpiece of their holdings in North America. And it's going to constantly be the target of the British. The British believe if they can conquer the fortified city of Quebec, New France will fall to them. So right off the bat, that's the target. These troops raised by Sir William Phipps attempt to conquer Quebec. And they fail. So the war, which you can see, King William's War, which starts in 1689, in relative terms back then, as a short, it's it's an average sized war, ends in 1697. Now what happens here is both sides tire of fighting. No one's really gaining the upper hand on the other. So they more or less call it a draw and go to the negotiation table and negotiate a settlement. So no one prevails in King William's War, but it's just the beginning. And it also establishes a trend. When a war between France and England ends in a draw with no clear-cut victor and no exchange of territory and whatnot, the next war is going to come pretty quickly. So, and it only makes sense. You've got commanders in both nations, armies and navies saying, boy, if I'd only had, 500 more troops on the battlefield, or if I'd only had 6 more ships in my fleet, I'd have won this thing. They're all second-guessing each other. So, as you can see, doesn't take long. 5 short years and they're back at each other's throats in Queen Anne's War. Queen Anne's War starts in 1702, as you can see. Once again, it's a war between France and its Native American allies versus Britain and their Native American allies. And the big event in this war is the French attack on Deerfield, Massachusetts in 1704, commonly known in Massachusetts as the Deerfield Massacre. Here's what happens. Deerfield, Massachusetts is not really of any significant military significance. It's a village of mainly farmers. And what the French decide to do is come down out of the St. Lawrence River Valley with a large contingency of their Native American allies and surprise attack Deerfield and bring the war to the civilians. And this, the French believe, will instill terror in every little village in New England. People won't be able to sleep at night thinking, is their village next? Are the French and their bloodthirsty Indians going to come and attack us? That's what they do at Deerfield. A lot of innocent civilians are slaughtered in this attack, and the French and their Indian allies are ruthless. Now, they believe this will put New England into a panic, upset the entire British colonies, and allow them to be victorious. Well, it ends up having the opposite effect. After they sort of regain their wits in New England, now they're mad. How dare you and your bloodthirsty, and I'm sure they called them savages, come down here and murder innocent civilians? We're going to let you have it. And it really turns the tide of the war in the favor of the British and the colonists. It riles them up. Volunteers are coming out of the woodwork to avenge the deaths of the Deerfield massacre. So, the Brits will firmly win this conflict, and it will end in 1713 at the negotiation table. And as a result of firmly winning the war, they're going to also win territory. They're going to win, the French will turn over Newfoundland to the British, which, might seem pretty strategic as it sits at the mouth of the St. Lawrence River, but due to currents and tides and so forth, no one enters the St. Lawrence River from the Newfoundland side. It's way too dangerous. You enter it from the Nova Scotia Cape Breton south side of the river, which is a long ways from Newfoundland. So it's more strategic, you'd think, than it really is. But the big prize that the British are awarded is the entire Hudson Bay region of present-day Canada. It's a gigantic region, and why it's so significant is one of the top fur-producing regions in the entire North America at that point. So it's a bonanza for the British to expand their fur trading enterprises. And it even creates a British sanctioned company that still exists up in Canada today, the Hudson Bay Company, which is a fur trading firm. And their main currency they use to trade for furs with the Native Americans are Hudson Bay blankets, which are very heavy wool blankets that you're probably familiar with. They're off-white with a yellow stripe, a green stripe, and a red stripe on them. They're sold in modern versions in LL Bean catalogs today. So, this is a big windfall for the British, and it really makes the British Empire stronger. Now, another trend exists on this chart. When there's a clear-cut winner, which we had in Queen Anne's War, the British defeated the French. It's going to create a lasting peace. As you'll notice, we're going to have 30 years of peace, which is a long time back in this era. It's going to be all the way till 1743 until the two sides are fighting again. Now, the next war, as you can see, is King George's War. Once again, a war between France and England and Native American allies. And as you can see, the major American battle is when troops raised in New England under the command of William Pepperell will capture the fortress at Louisburg. Now, let me explain to you what a feat this really is. Now, I mentioned before, no one enters the St. Lawrence River on the Newfoundland northern side of it. They all enter on the southern access, and there's one fortress on Cape Breton Island that defends the entire mouth of the St. Lawrence for the French. That's the fortress at Louisburg. Now, the British have come up with a new strategy. First, you need to capture the fortress at Louisburg so you have easy passage into the St. Lawrence, so you can also get a naval fleet up to Quebec. Because the key to capturing Quebec, or Quebec City as we call it today, is by both land and naval attack. So, to be able to do that, you have to conquer Louisburg first. So these forces raised in New England march all the way from New England up to the fortress at Louisburg, which if you were to drive it today would take you 20 hours. So these very brave colonial troops pull off the impossible. They lay siege to the fort and ultimately force the French to surrender it. This is the greatest victory by colonial troops up to this point in history. And the colonists are extremely proud of this accomplishment. Now, as you can see, this is going to be the shortest of the wars, only lasting till 1748. Now, both sides quickly grow tired of fighting. There's other conflicts going on in Europe, so they're going to end this war in a draw again. Right off the bat, we know what that means. Won't be long before they're fighting again. All the commanders are second-guessing each other. And as you can see, the next war, the French and Indian War, will begin in 1756. And actually, some fighting begins in 1754. So, but here's the biggest thing that happens as a result of King George's War. British negotiators over in Europe at the negotiation table blow it. They trade Louisburg and give it back to the French in exchange for territory lost elsewhere in the world by the British to the French. They swap territory. They don't realize what this victory meant to colonists, especially colonists in New England. When the word of this comes back, that this great victory that a lot of New Englanders gave their lives to accomplish is just treated this way and given right back to the French, this very strategic fort, they can't believe it. And they've had it. A lot of, especially people in New England, say if there's any more future wars between France and England, you're on your own. We're all done helping you. We see what we count for. I guess we're all disposable soldiers. You could care less if colonial blood's spilled. You just give it back like nothing. And remember, Louisburg becomes sort of the rallying cry among colonists in New England. This is really going to harm British war efforts in the future. And really, you can see the discontent beginning that's going to lead to the American Revolution. So, that's where I'm going to call it quits for today. I'm going to post 2 other lectures besides this one that will deal with the French and Indian War by tomorrow also. I recorded those lectures last spring, and they'll pick up where I left off today. Now, one thing I want to tell you is, in those lectures, there'll be parts in it where I refer to pages in a textbook that we're not using this semester. So don't be confused by it. Just disregard it. I'm going to scan some maps out of that textbook that I'm going to be referring to, and I'll post PDFs of them. But, it's the same subject material. It's just I'll refer to charts and maps in a different textbook. So just disregard those. So that's it for lectures for this module 3 in your textbook. I'm going to post all that I recorded today and a couple more. So make sure and watch those. Get in there. Get working on the discussions. Do those inquisitives before module 3 closes. You got plenty of time, but get to work. So I'll see you soon. And the next time that I talk to you, I'll be talking to you about the beginnings of the Revolutionary War. So take care, be safe. See you soon.